How would you define difference between sacred and secular?
Sacred would be protected. Sacred would be more protected. Like say something, say a song at the Vatican would be protected.
Okay.
Versus a secular song would be on the radio for all to hear.
Okay, so sacred is very much more in a limited space, if you will, right? Protected in that sense. Secular tends to be kind of broader.
Things of the world and things not of the world.
Okay. And as Christians, we understand that, and kind of, obviously we're all in the world, but of the world. So what comes from the various sources, whether from a specifically Christian source or not, I think people would often say sacred is that which has to do with religion, has to do in a more direct way with your relationship with God. Secular may be things that don't touch the soul in the same way, aren't about the heart quite in the same way. So government, as we've been talking about, is one thing that falls into those kinds of ideas of secular. The sciences, I suppose. I don't think you think of going to your job, wherever you work, as a sacred activity so much, although because you go to it, you are bringing some of that with you. But the job per se isn't, when I go to work, I do think of that as a sacred thing, but of course I'm in the business, right? Whereas for you, if you're, making pizzas or keeping a hospital running or installing HVAC somewhere, or keeping the cell phone towers up, or, just getting along in retirement, you don't think of that as sacred per se. You think of that as secular because it's not dealing with people's souls. It's not dealing with people's relationship with God in such a direct manner. The following passages, how does it apply to a Christian's understanding? 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. What does Paul say about just living a Christian life there? So if, using the categories that we looked at the top, when you go home at noon and eat your lunch, do you think of that as sacred or secular? You probably tend to think of it as secular. And we could go to Romans 14, I think, where the Apostle Paul talks about the fact that food does not affect your relationship with God. For the Old Testament Jews, it did. But in the New Testament times, if you go home and eat pork chops, it doesn't affect your relationship with God one way or the other. If you have a beer with lunch, it doesn't affect your relationship. If you have 10 beers, that's a problem. But if you have one, it doesn't affect your relationship with God so much. Food doesn't affect that. So we think of that as secular. And yet, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. Luther quoted this passage again in understanding that the housewife who's changing her baby's diapers is doing a good work, is loving and serving her neighbor, in this case her child, and in that it's not purely secular. It is a service to God and neighbor. It is carrying out of the second table of God's law and the 10 Commandments, loving your neighbor as yourself. And as such, this did enter, for that person at least, into the area of relationship with God. If you were chronically not doing that in our time, of course, you might have child protective services at your house. Even the government would recognize you've got a problem here. That the farmer who is shoveling manure out in his field to make it fertile so that it grows lots of grain so that he can feed the people in the village, that may seem like a very secular thing, hardly sacred at all, kind of stinky. But inasmuch as it served his neighbor, it was a godly thing. And for him himself, part of his Christian life. And that frankly, when he saw what was going on in the churches so much, in the monasteries, and some of the way the bishops just used their position to get power and money for themselves, he said the farmer's doing more for God there, throwing manure on the field, than the bishop sitting on his throne in the cathedral, bossing people about for his own purposes. So whether you eat or drink, whatever you do. And as a Christian, then you should carry that in to your life, right? Sometimes you go to work and you think, what am I doing here? Well, how does this help anybody? And even the most humble things you should recognize are still you serving God and serving your neighbor. It is a part of the whole machinery of how society works that God has set up. And that there are burdens and crosses to bear with that. Well, welcome to the club. It's always been that way. When God cursed the soil for Adam, he predicted it. And when Christ came and carried out his messianic work, it didn't all go smoothly. And they ended up crucifying him for it. And so if you get crucified at work sometime, don't be completely surprised. It goes along with the territory. But it doesn't mean that somehow your work has all been for nothing. Even if your neighbor does not recognize, your boss doesn't recognize, your coworkers don't recognize, your customers don't recognize the way in which you are serving them, you are at the very least still recognized as serving your Lord. You have a little bit of an example of this where Jesus speaks at the end of time. In Matthew chapter 25, he talks about what it'll be like when he's on his throne and all the people are gathered before him. And he says, "Come to me, you who are blessed, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to eat, drink. I was sick and you came to visit me," right? And at first those may seem like secular things, eating and drinking. But he says, "Inasmuch as you did it for one of the least of these who believe in me, you've done it for me." So we have to recognize the categories, but we need to be careful not to separate them too far and recognize that there is a whole lot of the religious or sacred that spills over into the secular, and that the things that happen in a secular sort of setting, they themselves often, even from the outside world, have a fair amount of what might be thought of as kind of religious baked in. Common labels of secular or non-religious are just as real as Santa and the Tooth Fairy, quote from the book. Likewise represent a childish view of reality that we'd all do well to leave behind. So how do the following, I kind of walked you through this. The following take on features of religion that call for worship. Where do you see the sacred in parenting?
You're teaching your kids, supposed to be teaching your kids about God.
Yeah, from a Christian point of view, job one as a parent is to lead them to Jesus. If you look in the rites that our church has for baptism, it's one of the things that we urge upon parents is that they will bring their children early in life to baptism, and that they will bring them to know Jesus at Sunday school. But that's kind of job one. What about romance?
That too. That also, because you want a Christian relationship.
Yeah. So it's not just about finding somebody who tickles your fancy.
Right.
It's not just finding someone you think is attractive. It is finding someone that you're going to serve and that is going to serve you. One of my professors, John Jeske, now in heaven, used to say that one way of understanding Christian marriage is that two people who up until this point in time were walking the path through life alone have now joined hands to walk that path together. And that job one as a parent is to get your kids to Jesus in heaven. Job one, frankly, in a Christian marriage is to get your spouse to Jesus in heaven. And so we see that they're not completely separate. And then, of course, it informs a lot about the way that you carry out your courtship. What are you looking to do with that? Okay, not so much an institution as just the concept, but success.
You take pride in the Lord.
Say it again?
Well, you take pride in the Lord, of course.
Okay.
Of course, I mean, people get those people get awards and stuff praised, and when the person thanks God for all this success.
So, will Christians sometimes be successful?
Yeah.
Can they count on it?
No.
No. You can do your best. Won't always work out that way, right? You've got to be ready for that, and the scriptures warn you to be ready for that. Just because you've been good doesn't mean it comes out in what we usually being successful in that case is being faithful, not necessarily having all the awards and accolades and money and promotions, right? But Christians will be successful. Of course, there's a whole wing of pseudo-Christianity anyway that wants to make success the measure of how good a Christian you are. Most of those guys have TV shows, right? And they have, fleets of airplanes and mansions and all that kind of stuff, and they drive fancy European sports cars and dress in $1,000 suits and wear Rolex watches. Go ahead.
A stupid thing is, I went to a family reunion, and all of these guys are like cattlemen, out in West Texas and stuff, and New Mexico. And it wasn't meant to be a religious comment at all, but there's some of the family of the Murphys that are like, they have this ability to manage money. They kind of save it, they don't blow it,
right.
They manage it.
Gift of God.
And so one of the oldest guys there that was, he said, every once in a while, a Murphy will start making money. You have this gift of, holding the nickels together, and darn it, they'll move to Dallas, so it ruins it for, they just ruin it. They're just sort of just simple working guys that just enjoy life the way it is, and, it's just when they become wealthy and well-to-do, they lose the whole point, the whole culture of Murphy. Shows you what kind of
so the opportunities the big city offers for spending that money to kind of make the whole thing unravel. Is that the idea?
No, I think it's more of the culture war between
rural
area. And
they jump to the other side.
Right. The people are small town. They don't lord it over other people. Okay, well.
I gotcha. Get a little.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I look at the people in front of me, and generally speaking, you've been pretty successful, especially compared to much of the world outside of our country, and you're at least in the average of our own country. So when God grants success, he told the children of Israel, if you guys, there's going to be exceptions always, but if you follow what I have to say, if you worship me faithfully, if you don't go to other gods, every man will sit underneath his own vine and fig tree, and you'll have your own homes, and there will be a certain enjoyment. But if a Christian finds success, well, then how does your religion enter into that going forward? Okay, I think Robert points out what not to do here, but
it's just cowboys.
So recognize as a gift from God, it is to be managed. This is where the whole area of Christian stewardship comes in, right? So God didn't make you successful just for your own comfort. Your life is serving God and serving your neighbor. I've known people who've tried to just, I'm secularly successful, and that's my secular life, and my religious life is over here, and it never seems to occur to them that maybe some of what I've gained here should be brought over to supporting God's kingdom, giving my time to God's kingdom, giving those abilities that made this successful over to God's kingdom. And that the scriptures are clear about that, and not shy to speak about it, that if God has made us financially successful, some of that money ought to be... Well, finally, how much of your money does God want?
Whatever you want to give.
That's one way of understanding it, yet I would say it's more than that. How much of your money does God want?
Well, there's a book that starts, not yours, but you.
Oh, okay. So what does that say about how much? The whole thing, right? Now, inside of giving God everything, then you have to determine how much of it do I give to support God by taking care of my family? How much of it do I give to God by preparing for my retirement? How much do I give to God by other community projects? How much do I give to God by taking care of the work of his kingdom at church? But whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. So he wants the whole thing, because the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, including you, right?
It's just
The whole thing. And then we have to figure this out, right? And that's not going to be the same for everybody, because everybody has different circumstances, different challenges, different needs. It's going to look very different in everybody's life. Some people have more, some have less. Some have more problems, some have less. And that all plays into it.
Our culture that just pretty much ties success straight to money is the way I always see it is how much money do you make? Okay, you're successful, you're not. But look
That's
at
how
all
we
these-
keep score.
That's how the score's kept. But look at all these people that have vast amounts of money and are absolutely miserable, commit suicide, die of drug overdoses. It's pretty much clear that money does not equal success.
So I read an article, I think it was in New York Magazine a couple years ago, maybe more. A gentleman who graduated from Harvard, went back to a class reunion. All these people had Harvard MBAs or PhDs. Almost none of them were happy with their life. Now, in terms of where they were in society, they were like 1%ers. They were lawyers, they were doctors, they were government workers. They were the people at the top crust of society in every way, without exception of any of the people he talked to. He had trouble finding anybody who was content. And he himself would admit he was having problems getting to that point. So that's how the world keeps score. It is apparently a very stupid way to keep score, because
What's that old saying? Money is the root of all evil.
Love of money.
the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So
But it does.
yeah, it creates now that being said, nobody says, well, I would like less.
Right.
But it does speak to the challenge of
But
handling
it's
it
what you
properly.
do if you have it.
Yeah. Right. So how do you regard it? So, and you've probably met people. So again, Robert was talking about relatives who let it change them. And you've probably met people like that. People who've risen up from having nothing to having just about everything. Generally, when I look at it, they worked hard, yes, but there was an awful lot of right time, right place. You know, that somebody who worked just as hard in different circumstances would not have gotten there. Right time, right place. And I've also met some people who've been completely unspoiled by it, so far as you could tell. They were as down to earth and humble and sharing and giving as they had ever been. And they didn't put on any airs about being any better than anybody. They weren't patronizing.
There's in the Velma oil field down there in Duncan in southern Oklahoma, there was a guy who made $1 million and things like that. And so the example is he didn't move. He didn't go to Dallas. He lived in a tar paper shack. If he had a Rolls Royce, it was parked out with other things on his lawn and stuff like that. And he kept the same friends. So, okay, he didn't eat from the best restaurants, but he knew who his friends were. So okay, that's why. So he didn't change him, and he chose to keep the same lifestyle, same ratty, ramshackle.
So I've read a couple articles. I think Dave Ramsey comments on it, but I've seen other people comment on the same kind of thing. That so there's a lot of people that maybe your next door neighbors that are millionaires, multimillionaires, but you would have no idea. It hasn't changed them, and they are content with the same things they always were content with. They just happen to have a lot of money stored away somewhere. And then there's other people who got to wear it like a uniform, right? So another thing some of those guys point out, even Warren Buffett, says that the person driving the Lexus or the Mercedes is probably a wannabe. So they try to act and live the part. And part of doing that is what keeps them from it. That I think I might have mentioned this in earlier. The most common car in the United States driven by millionaires is a Honda Accord. It's not a Lexus. It's not a Mercedes.
It's not the top of the line.
It's not it's just a kind of a middle of the road kind of. It's a reliable vehicle. But they're not trying. They feel confident in what they are, and they're not trying to show off and try to gain a false sense of respect. So we've got to
Okay, right.
Go ahead.
I was up at a house in Oklahoma City. HVAC unit's broken down. Elderly guy meets me at the front door. I'm so glad you're here. Walks me up through this massive house. I mean, indoor pools. Walks me up to the mechanical room. 10 HVAC units in a row to handle on this house. He stands over my shoulder talking to me as I'm working on it. And I had no idea who he was. It was owner of Hobby Lobby, Mr. Green.
Oh,
So you're talking billionaire, right?
right.
Then I go to Dallas, big house. Property manager comes out. Homeowners never want to see you. Fancy cars in the driveway. And you're sitting here thinking, okay, it changed these. Didn't change him as far as I could see a whole lot. He was just a easygoing, nice guy. You know?
Just because you're the help.
I would have
didn't mean
loved to
that-
ask him how he measured his success. But I'm working on his HVAC.
Oh, right.
I guarantee you, he would not have said.
It takes a little time to develop that relationship where you can have that conversation comfortably in most cases. Yeah, yeah.
Well, and you can have nice things and be, successful, but it doesn't make you a bad person if you want to drive a Lexus or if you want to, but it's.
No, so, and that needs to be understood,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, I think it's in the next class I've got, in the next class, I've got one of these, I embedded a video of great moments and unintended consequences. But one of them, and I don't know if it's in the one I picked or not, but so in an attempt to raise funds, government puts a luxury tax on people who buy yachts. Well, and you can, I think a lot of people feel that's somewhat understandable, or on the yachts themselves. But what it did, but the thing is, they forgot that one person buys the yacht, but maybe 100 middle class people build it. And that the unintended consequence was you drove the market down and you put thousands out of work. And so did you accomplish what you were going for there, right? It's unintended consequences. Anyway.
I seen this morning on the news reel that somewhere the price of water went up 40% because of the conservation they put in place. Wasn't enough water usage, so they taxed it 40%.
Okay, yeah. Well, anyway, so it will become clear where I stuck it in the class, why it's there. But anyway, so we all think of. Okay, so in this one, I'm not going to go through all of these. We've kind of talked about how your Christian life ought to fall in. Another way of understanding the question and looking at these is, so how does parenting become, features of religion that call for our worship, how does it become like a false religion? How does romance become like a false religion? How does success become like, we kind of talked about that here, I think. How does school become like a false religion? How does sports become like a false religion? How does political involvement become like a false religion?
And they go above God.
So I think so. So I've known parents who are all about the family, and it's a good thing to some degree. But at some point in time, they've begun to worship their children, and keeping that in balance is a hard thing. And then maybe as grandparents, when you get grandkids, it's even harder. Because they're so dear, right? And they're so cute. And you can elevate them in a way that starts to compete with God Himself and true religion. And so, it can go over the top, and it kind of becomes the religion. I've heard of whole churches where that kind of attitude it's like that's what the mission of that church is, to just promote the family. And then you wonder, is Jesus really Lord there anymore? And it's a subtle thing.
Griffin
Sports.
Park's got about 3,000 over there probably today.
Where's that?
Griffin Park, or
yeah,
the
soccer.
soccer fields on Sunday. I'd say it's locking it up for religion.
So I think when you think of how much people pay to go to sporting events, you make your donation, and the way they cheer, it has. And the way they obsess about their favorite teams, you can see where that kind of rises in people's priorities to the point where this starts to do a little switcheroo, and it takes on some of those kinds, you know, and they will defend their favorite team even when there is hardly anything to defend about them, right? They will broach no criticism, get into fights about it even, you know, they become evangelists for their favorite team.
Live vicariously through their kids when they're playing on the team.
Well, okay, yeah. So that it takes on elements of, you know, it should be a secular thing, we might think, right? But it takes on elements of getting in the way that way. Political involvement, I mean, I really think if we didn't sometimes idolize the people that we send to represent us and try to govern us, maybe we wouldn't have the degree of polarization that we do. And if we, you know, again, people can't even have civil conversations with each other about these things at times because they haven't taken Psalm 146 fully into consideration. Do not put your trust in princes, in mortal men who cannot save. You know, they're going to turn to dust. Blessed is he whose help is the Lord, whose hope is the God of Jacob, right? But there are no saviors. There are no saviors in the political world. There's only one Savior. And he eschewed an earthly kingdom. Right? My kingdom is not of this world. But there is definitely cults of the personality, strong cults of the personality in the political world. Doesn't mean we maybe wouldn't be for the same candidate, but we should be aware and careful and maybe try to help some people out of the cult following. Right? There are no saviors in the political world. If you're putting your trust in men, right? You want to see where that leads, you look at Nazi Germany, and I know the Nazis everybody's a Nazi today. You know, it's the, you know, you can shut down the argument, win the argument, well, you're a Nazi. But I mean, you know, Hitler rose in that kind of estimation among the people of his time. He was going to be the savior of a nation that was low and had been kind of beaten up by the previous World War. And people stopped thinking, and they just bowed down to it all. And you know, that's one example. Obviously, the Romans institutionalized that with the emperor cult for hundreds of years. Okay, we probably talked that through. Revelation 21:2. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. Oops, we skipped one there. How do the following passages help us live in the world as resident aliens or foreigners whose citizenship is in heaven? 1 John 2:17. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. So first of all, we need to live with this constant realization that nothing in this world lasts. The world and its desires. Ever been to an old cemetery? The headstones are covered with moss. Nobody goes there anymore. That person could have been president of the United States practically. They could have started some great company. They could have made millions of dollars. Nobody even goes to the grave. Right? Everything you and I accomplish in this world is only so long, and then it's done.
My just hyper-conservative history teacher or teacher of history in junior high said, whatever it is, it will pass. Which love won't pass away.
Good or bad.
Right.
Good or bad, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, understand that. Matthew 24, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So the one thing you can depend on is the word of God, the promises of Christ, that will hold to. On this rock I'll build my church, the gates of hell will not overcome it. So all the institutions of this world come and go, except the Holy Christian Church. Now we're not talking about Grace, we're not talking about the Wisconsin Lutheran Synod, but we are talking about the Holy Christian Church that we confess in the Nicene and Apostles' Creed. That's never going away. And so that's something that you can build on. And so as we think about what has lasting and real value and not, understand the things God promises. The Holy City, the New Jerusalem, it's essentially the church, coming down out of heaven from God as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. So when we get to eternity, there's the church, right? The church doesn't, it's not just for this world even. It's not just it's going to last through time, but through eternity. Revelation 21:3, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. So the opportunity to get to eternity, to live with God, to spend time with him, that is the lasting thing that we need to work at. So the more we're at home in the Jerusalem of the church, the safer we are in the Babylon of this world. And then the conclusion, blessed are those who fail to conform to this world, yet also fail to cut themselves off from it, for they know their true citizenship is in Jerusalem above. Thought we might start the next one today, but we will start with a brand new lesson next week. All right.